She touched a royal guard. Seconds later, he confessed a heartbreaking secret no one expected.
She challenged the royal guard. What happened next was shocking. The girl who never backed down, the morning sun glinted off the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, London. Like every day, hundreds of tourists had gathered along the railings, cameras raised, phones ready, waiting for that famous spectacle, the changing of the guard. Street vendors sold small flags. Children sat on their parents' shoulders. A row of red-coated guards stood along the courtyard wall, motionless as painted figures. Among the crowd stood a young woman named Elira Hartwell, 22 years old, a final-year journalism student at a London university. Unlike most people in the crowd, she wasn't here for photographs. She was here for a research project, one she had been struggling to write for weeks. Her assignment was simple on paper: explore the meaning behind a modern British tradition. But Elira had grown increasingly frustrated with her own research. She had interviewed tour guides, read historical archives, even spoken to retired guardsmen, and every answer she received felt rehearsed, hollow, recycled from a tourist pamphlet. "I keep getting the same answer," she'd told her professor the week before. "Discipline, honor, history. But nobody tells me what it actually feels like to stand there for hours saying nothing, feeling nothing. I'm starting to think there's nothing left to feel. Just a costume and a routine." Her professor had smiled knowingly. Sometimes the only way to find truth is to test it yourself. That comment had stayed with her all week. And today, standing in the crowd, watching a guard named Sergeant Colin Ashworth hold his position without so much as a blink, something in Elira decided she wasn't leaving without an answer. 12 years of silence. Sergeant Ashworth had joined the Grenadier Guards at 19. Now 31, he had spent nearly 12 years mastering a discipline that most people could never understand: the art of complete stillness under any provocation. Tourists had shouted at guards before. Some had made faces, waved hands inches from their eyes, even thrown objects to test their reactions. Ashworth had endured all of it without flinching, exactly as trained. But there was one memory Ashworth carried that no training manual could prepare a man for. 2 years earlier, on an ordinary Tuesday, Ashworth had been standing this exact post when a fellow officer approached with urgent news during the changeover. His younger sister, Miriam, had been in a serious car accident. She was in critical condition at a hospital across the city. Protocol was unambiguous. A guard on ceremonial duty does not leave post except through formal relief procedure, which could take upward of 40 minutes depending on scheduling. Ashworth had stood there rigid, silent, his heart breaking beneath his red coat while precious minutes passed. By the time he was finally relieved and reached the hospital, his sister had already passed away. He never got to say goodbye. He had never told anyone outside his family about that day, not his commanding officers, not his closest friends in the regiment. He had simply returned to duty 3 days later, his face as unreadable as ever, and never spoke of it again. Until today. The challenge Elira moved closer to the barrier, close enough that Ashworth's peripheral vision would have registered her presence. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew you weren't supposed to approach the guards, let alone address them directly. Signs posted nearby explicitly warned tourists to keep their distance. "Excuse me," Elira said, raising her voice slightly so it carried clearly. "I have a question, and I'd really like an honest answer, even if you're not allowed to give me one." Ashworth did not move. His eyes remained fixed forward, exactly as they had been for the past 40 minutes. "Are you actually human under there?" Elira continued, her tone more curious than mocking. "Or is this whole thing, the stillness, the silence, is it just training that's erased whatever person used to be underneath? Do you feel anything standing here, or has that all been trained out of you?" A ripple of nervous laughter passed through parts of the crowd. Someone murmured, "She's going to get in trouble." Elira took a step closer still. "I'm not trying to mock you. I've spent weeks trying to understand what this tradition actually means to the people living it, and every answer I get feels rehearsed. So I'm asking you directly, is there a person in there or just a costume?" Security personnel near the gate had already begun to take notice, quietly signaling to one another. Phones throughout the crowd rose higher, recording. Everyone sensed something unusual was happening. Then, almost without meaning to, Illyra reached forward and lightly touched the sleeve of Ashworth's red coat. Not aggressively, barely more than a brush of fingertips, simply to see, finally, if there was any reaction at all. That single touch was the moment everything changed. What happened next? Ashworth's training told him precisely what to do in this situation. Remain still. Make no contact, allow security to intervene. He had followed that exact protocol 100 times before with far more aggressive provocations. But this time, for reasons even he couldn't fully explain in the moment, something cracked, for one fraction of a second, visible to everyone close enough to see it, including the cameras now recording. His eyes, always distant and unreadable, filled with something raw. Pain, grief. 2 years' worth of silence rising to the surface all at once. The crowd around them fell quiet. Breaking every rule of his post, Ashworth spoke. His voice was low, controlled, but unmistakably shaking at the edges. My sister used to ask me questions like that, he said, so quietly that only Illyra and those nearest could hear. She used to say the same thing, that she wondered if there was still a person under this coat, or if the army had trained it out of me. Illyra's hand dropped immediately, her earlier confidence draining from her face. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... She died 2 years ago. Ashworth continued as if he couldn't stop now that he'd started. I was standing on this exact spot when I got the news. I couldn't leave my post, and that's the rule. By the time I reached the hospital, she was already gone. I never got to hold her hand. I never got to say goodbye. I've stood here every day since, and no one has ever asked me what that felt like. Until you did. A woman in the crowd gasped audibly. Several phone cameras lowered, as if the people holding them suddenly felt it wrong to keep filming. So you asked if there's a person under this uniform, Ashworth said, finally turning his head, the first deliberate movement he had made in over half an hour, and looking directly into Illyra's eyes. Yes, there is. We just aren't allowed to show it, because we're trained to believe that showing it makes us weak. But every single one of us standing along this wall is carrying something. Grief, love, fear, memory. The uniform doesn't erase that. It just asks us to hide it. The reckoning Illyra's eyes had filled with tears she hadn't expected. I had no idea. I'm so sorry, I never meant to bring up something so painful. I just wanted to understand. No, Ashworth said, cutting her off gently, his voice steadier now. Don't apologize. You asked the one question I should have asked myself a long time ago.
Maybe the problem isn't that people forget we're human.
Maybe it's that we've gotten so good at hiding it we forget it ourselves. At that moment, a senior officer, Major Richard Whitfield, who had been observing from near the guardhouse, strode forward, his expression sharp with concern. Speaking during ceremonial duty was a serious breach, one that could result in formal discipline, even removal from the regiment. Sergeant Ashworth, Major Whitfield said firmly, "You're aware that engaging with the public during your post is strictly against regulation." Ashworth straightened immediately, snapping back into formal posture, and offered a crisp salute. "Yes, sir. I'm fully aware, and I accept whatever consequence follows." Before the major could respond further, Illyra stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "Sir, please, this was entirely my doing. I provoked him. I touched him when I shouldn't have. If there's blame here, it belongs to me, not him. What he did afterward wasn't a failure of discipline. It was just honesty." Major Whitfield studied the two of them for a long moment. The young woman taking responsibility without hesitation, and the guard who had just spoken more openly than in 12 years of service. Something in his stern expression eased just slightly. "I won't make a judgment here in the courtyard," he said finally. "This will be reviewed properly, through the correct channels. But I will say this much. What I witnessed today wasn't misconduct in the way the regulation defines it. It looked to me like a man choosing truth over silence. That's not nothing." The story spreads by that evening. Footage of the encounter had spread across social media at astonishing speed. It had begun as what many assumed would be a prank gone wrong, a tourist testing a guard's legendary composure. But the clip that actually went viral wasn't the touch, or even the brief flicker of emotion on Ashworth's face. It was his voice, quietly explaining what it meant to lose someone while standing frozen at your post, unable to move. Comments flooded in from around the world. We forget these guards are human beings with families and grief of their own, not just decorations outside a palace. Others wrote about their own experiences with rigid duty and hidden pain, recognizing something of themselves in Ashworth's words. That night, Alira sat at her desk and completely rewrote her research paper. Her original working title, The Empty Ritual, no longer fit anything she now believed. She retitled it The Man Behind the Coat and closed her paper with these words. I began this project convinced that tradition had become hollow, a performance without meaning. I was wrong. Tradition isn't empty. We simply stop looking closely enough to see what it's protecting, until someone reminds us there's a real person standing inside it, carrying more than we ever imagined. What came after in the weeks that followed? The formal review into Ashworth's conduct concluded quietly. Rather than facing disciplinary action, he was offered a new role, training incoming recruits not only in the discipline of ceremonial duty, but in understanding its human cost. The regiment quietly revised certain relief protocols as well, ensuring no guard would ever again be forced to remain at post during a genuine family emergency. Without swift, immediate relief, Alira and Ashworth met once more, several weeks later, this time by formal arrangement, for a follow-up interview tied to her now widely shared article. Ashworth, out of uniform for the first time in their acquaintance, seemed almost like a different person, more relaxed, though the same quiet steadiness remained in his eyes. You asked me something I should have asked myself years ago, he told her. Thank you for that, even if it didn't feel like a kindness at the time. Alira smiled. You taught me something too. I used to think strength meant never showing anything at all. Now I think real strength is admitting what you're carrying without letting it break you. Epilogue today. The guards outside Buckingham Palace still stand exactly as they always have. Silent, motionless, seemingly unshakable. Tourists still gather each morning to watch, cameras raised, expecting nothing more than a photograph and a piece of tradition. But those who were present that particular morning never saw the guards quite the same way again. Because for one unforgettable moment, they had witnessed what stood behind the uniform, behind the practiced stillness, behind centuries of unbroken tradition, real grief, real love, and real humanity, quietly enduring beneath the surface all along. And sometimes, it only takes one fearless question from a stranger in the crowd to remind an entire nation that even the stillest guard is still, underneath it all, simply human.